If we don't make a deal with Canada, we're going to put a big tariff on cars, could be a 50 or 100%, because we don't want their cars.
Critical. I love the idea or the aspiration of a Canadian car.
In early 2025, Donald Trump stood at a podium and declared, "Every car sold in America should be built in America." He didn't just say it, he backed it with action. First came the steel tariffs, then aluminum, then a 25% levy on finished vehicles imported from Canada. The message was loud and clear. Washington was done tolerating cross-border production. But this wasn't just about policy. It was about pressure. And now the consequences are catching up, not just for Canada but for U.S. automakers themselves. The Trump administration called it a strategic reset, but for many manufacturers, it felt like economic whiplash. Companies had spent decades building integrated supply chains across the border. Overnight, those links became liabilities. The modern North American car isn't built in one place. It's assembled across the border piece by piece in a choreography refined over decades. A piston might start as aluminum mined in Quebec, molded in Ontario, finished in Detroit, then installed in an engine back in Windsor. By the time it ends up in a vehicle, it has crossed the US-Canada border 5 or 6 times. This isn't inefficiency, it's specialization. Canada focuses on castings, stampings, and high-volume parts. The US handles final assembly electronics and software for decades. This partnership allowed Ford, GM, and Stellantis to optimize costs, reduce delays, and scale production. This Bacchanal dance was made possible by policy certainty, starting with the 1965 Auto Act, then NAFTA, and now USMCA. Disrupting it isn't just costly, it risks undoing the very system that kept Detroit competitive in a global market. That balance is now under siege.
We want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada. We put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars.
Trump's 25% tariff on Canadian vehicles combined with a 50% tariff on Canadian steel has upended that equation. Since June 2025, Ford and Stellantis have paused production lines in Ontario, citing cost spikes and declining demand. Stellantis' Windsor plant now operates in staggered shifts. General Motors, meanwhile, ramped up production of trucks in Fort Wayne, Indiana, diverting output from Oshawa. These are not isolated moves. The U.S. auto industry is bleeding. Stellantis alone reported up to $5 billion in tariff-related losses last quarter, according to internal earnings reviewed by Bloomberg. Ford estimated similar figures. The Canadian auto parts industry, which supplies roughly half its output to U.S. plants, is now watching its order books dry up. And beyond just steel and cars, Trump's trade pressure has spread to tooling and molds, specialized manufacturing sectors dominated by Canadian firms. Several suppliers in Ontario say they've lost long-term contracts from U.S. buyers who fear uncertainty more than price. Meanwhile, American automakers are seeing ripple effects in labor relations. UAW leaders in Michigan have warned that rapid shifts in production strategy driven by political uncertainty could derail recent labor deals and plant modernization plans. And that's just the beginning.
President Trump actually gave Canada a gift. It's really the first time that Canada or Canadians are looking back and saying, how did we allow ourselves to get into the vulnerable position that we are in?
Trump didn't need to implement a 100% tariff. He simply had to float the threat. That alone was enough to freeze Canadian investment, disrupt Bacchanal logistics, and trigger panic in boardrooms. But here's the catch. As automakers pull away from Canada, they're not necessarily building more in America, they're scaling down, they're rerouting to Mexico, or just not reinvesting at all. And as Canada threatens retaliation by July 21st, potentially targeting American auto exports, Detroit now risks losing its second largest foreign market. Trump may have scored a political win, but he's also shaken the foundations of a $100 billion ecosystem, one where the U.S. can't truly win if its closest partner collapses.
You also have to ask, is Canada still buying those cars?
We buy about 1.8 million vehicles a year. They might lose the market, or their market of 1.8 million vehicles drops because maybe we put tariffs on U.S.-made vehicles.
When President Trump raised tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50% in mid-2025, the rhetoric was familiar: protect American jobs, punish unfair trade. But somewhere between the press releases and the political bravado, the impact on everyday people got lost. Because while factories adjust and politicians posture, consumers are the ones paying the price. Literally. On average, U.S. families are now spending an estimated $1,300 more per year on cars and appliances, according to a June report by the Center for Automotive Research. And across the border, Canadians are responding, not with anger, but with silence. They're walking away from U.S.-made vehicles. Dealerships in Ontario and Quebec have reported up to a 30% drop in sales of U.S. brands since April. Some are shifting floor space toward Korean and European models, while others say customers are holding off until the tariffs go away, if they ever do.
And that tariff doubled to 50%. The issue is that 91% of Canadian steel exports go to the United States. Nearly 1,000 steel jobs have been lost so far.
Canada's steel sector is the first casualty, with 91% of its exports heading to the U.S. The 50% tariff has caused nearly 1,000 job losses so far, according to the Canadian Steel Producers Association. More could come in the weeks ahead, with towns like Sault-Marie bracing for what one mayor called post-industrial collapse. Canada hasn't retaliated yet. Prime Minister Mark Carney has set a July 21st deadline. If no trade deal is reached, counter-tariffs on U.S. exports could begin. In the meantime, Canada is trying to shield itself. Federal procurement contracts now require domestic steel. Quotas have been imposed on cheap imports from non-free trade agreement countries, but none of it is enough to restore stability. Catherine Cobden, president of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, has warned that blast furnaces can't just pause production. Once they shut down, many never restart. Thousands more jobs are now on the line, with little time left before irreversible damage.
And we've got this tariff on finished auto goods. And if the vehicles made in Canada cost 25% more to American consumers.
In April alone, Canadian vehicle exports to the U.S. dropped by nearly 23%, driven by Trump's 25% auto tariff. Buyers in both countries are hesitant. U.S. prices are up. Canadian assembly plants are down, and dealers from Toronto to Buffalo are left guessing which model will be canceled next. For decades, Canadians bought over 1.8 million U.S. vehicles annually. That number is shrinking fast. Carney's government has even floated the idea of retaliatory tariffs or lifting import duties on Chinese cars, a signal that U.S. brands may no longer be the default choice. In the U.S., meanwhile, uncertainty has halted forward planning. Automakers are slashing production forecasts. Customers are delaying purchases, and despite short-term sales boosts at Ford and Hyundai in May, experts warn demand is being pulled forward, not grown. Some analysts worry that these trade disruptions are breaking trust, not just between nations, but between consumers and the companies they rely on. If a customer can't be sure whether their vehicle will be serviced, warrantied, or supported next year, they may not buy at all.
Okay.
If you build here, you have no tariffs whatsoever. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think our country is going to be flooded with jobs for everybody.
Could be done, but it would take years, if not decades, to get the supply chain back on track.
Trump promised a rebirth of American manufacturing, but in practice, he's delivered something else. Chaos across North America's most integrated supply chain. His tariff threats may look strong on paper, but on the ground, they've created confusion, delays, and rising costs. All of it shouldered by workers and consumers. This isn't just a trade war, it's a confidence crisis. And for millions of families deciding whether to buy a new car, the message from Washington is anything but reassuring. Sometimes the most expensive thing in politics is unpredictability.
Canada, they were foolish to do it. And so I said, we're going to stop all negotiations with Canada right now until they straighten out their act.
U.S. President Donald Trump repeating his rhetoric over Canada becoming the 51st state, days after saying trade negotiations between the two countries have ended.
It started with a sentence. President Trump declared, "We're done talking." In one abrupt move, he ended trade negotiations with Canada, America's closest neighbor and longest-standing ally. It wasn't just about taxes. It wasn't just about trade. What followed was something far more provocative. Trump said,
"We will be fine with Canada. I love Canada. Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state."
The shock wasn't just in the statement. It was in the timing, the tone, and the threat that came right after. New tariffs, 7 days, and zero room for compromise. You know, this policy actually was introduced by the previous administration in Canada. It was bad policy then, and it's bad policy now. Rain, and now Carney has no income. He's trying to find any way he can to make income. At the center of the explosion was a tax, a 3% levy on digital services introduced by Canada and set to take effect on July 1st. It targets major U.S. tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Meta. Investor Kevin O'Leary described the tax as a desperate measure, pointing to Trudeau-era energy restrictions as the root of Canada's revenue crisis. Though long in the making, planned since 2019 and passed into law in 2024, it was the moment of collection that triggered Trump's fury. According to estimates from Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office, this tax could bring in nearly $7 billion US over 5 years. Trump didn't just oppose it. He viewed it as an attack, one that demanded immediate retaliation. And so he slammed the brakes on all trade talks, warning that tariffs would be imposed on key Canadian exports within the week. But this wasn't just about big tech. It was about power, politics, and old grudges. It's pure Trump. It's the way he negotiates. He throws live munitions at something and he hopes that something in his favor will come of it. Trump has never hidden his disdain for Canada's supply management system, a framework that protects dairy, poultry, and egg farmers through quotas and price controls. It was a sticking point in the original NAFTA talks. And despite being enshrined in the USMCA agreement Trump himself signed, he's now calling it unfair. Then came the metals. Steel and aluminum are back in the firing line, industries that have seen tariffs rise and fall multiple times since 2018. To Trump, Canada is a dependent partner who enjoys U.S. market access without paying its dues. That's the justification he gives, not just for trade penalties, but for something even more dramatic. By suggesting Canada become the 51st state, Trump is using the language of absorption to assert dominance. Critics call it rhetorical theater, but for Trump, it's a power play, and it's a move designed to force a response. You know, no one takes seriously here in the United States his talk about the 51st state, but he does seem to be using it as a form of leverage, or hoping that it could be used as leverage to get what he perceives to be a better deal. While Trump turns up the volume, Canada turns inward. Prime Minister Mark Carney has avoided direct confrontation. Behind closed doors, senior officials continue quiet outreach to Washington, trying to salvage some path forward. The Canadian government shows no signs of abandoning its agricultural protections, a red line in every negotiation. But the digital services tax, that's another matter. Sources within the Canadian Finance Ministry, speaking on background to local media, have acknowledged the DST may be flexible if it leads to a broader deal. Meanwhile, Trump is under pressure. His 90 deals in 90 days campaign is running out of time before the July 9th deadline. His signature spending bill, nicknamed the Big Beautiful Bill, faces resistance in the Senate. And even Elon Musk, once a close ally, is publicly criticizing his economic priorities. Trump needs a win. Canada, for now, refuses to hand him one. So what's next? If Canada caves on the DST, a reset in negotiations is possible. If they hold the line, Trump could follow through on tariffs that would hit Canadian steel, aluminum, and dairy, damaging sectors already under pressure from inflation and slowing global demand. But the deeper risk is strategic. Trump isn't just testing Canada. He's testing the boundaries of trade diplomacy itself, turning up pressure, making personal demands, blurring the line between economic and political integration. In this high-stakes standoff, there are no easy outcomes, but one truth is clear. Trump is not negotiating for just a trade deal. He's negotiating for leverage, legacy, and the illusion of control. And while markets react and headlines swirl, it's workers, consumers, and families on both sides of the border who will carry the cost.